Welcome to China Events. I am Jason. The U.S. will provide cluster munitions to Ukraine has caused great concern in the international community, and criticism and concern are incessant. In response to the U.S. move to provide cluster munitions to Ukraine, the Russian Foreign Ministry said on July 8 that the U.S. decision to provide cluster munitions to Ukraine is an act of desperation and will not have any impact on Russia's special military operations in Ukraine. On July 7, local time, U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy Colin Carr announced that the latest U.S. assistance program to Ukraine will provide additional artillery systems and munitions, including cluster munitions, and additional anti-aircraft munitions, armored vehicles, and other equipment. Currently, the U.S. 155mm howitzers fire two main types of cluster munitions, the M483A1 and M864, with the M864 containing 72 sub-bombs. In an interview with CNN on the same day, President Joe Biden said it was a difficult decision to provide cluster munitions to Ukraine for the first time, but Kyiv needs them, CNN reported on July 7. As part of a new $800 million military aid package, the move is aimed at improving Kyiv's military capabilities against Russian forces. However, allies such as Spain, Germany, Britain and Canada have voiced their opposition, and the United Nations and dozens of human rights groups have condemned it. As the Russia-Ukraine conflict reached its 500th day, the United States announced on July 7 that it was providing cluster munitions to Ukraine. According to AFP, this move not only immediately caused a protest in the United States, Canada, Spain and other countries in the United Nations have expressed opposition to this. British Prime Minister Sunak said on the 8th, the Convention on Cluster Munitions prohibits the production or use of cluster munitions. UN Secretary-General Guterres also called on relevant parties to comply with the provisions of the relevant articles of the Convention on Cluster Munitions. In addition, German, Iranian, Italian and Russian politicians have also spoken out against the use of cluster bombs. According to U.S. media reports, at least 38 human rights organizations have spoken out against the U.S. supply of cluster munitions to Ukraine. According to these human rights organizations, civilians on both sides of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict have been ravaged by war since the outbreak of the conflict, and many deaths have been left on the ground, which poses a great threat to the safety of local civilians. Cluster munitions are extremely deadly weapons in which bullets can be spread over large areas, some failing to detonate, posing a huge risk to civilians and the environment. While Kyiv has assured Washington that cluster munitions will not be used in civilian areas, in practice they are systematically deployed with NATO-supplied artillery, rockets, and missiles to attack civilian infrastructure in the Donbass, Crimea, and other parts of Russia. Cluster munitions can contain anywhere from a few dozen to several hundred explosive submunitions in a single warhead, and can be delivered by air or ground launch. These submunitions spread over a large area and destroy multiple targets simultaneously. Unexploded explosive ordnance often remains after use, posing a long-term threat to civilians. Land contaminated by cluster munitions cannot be cultivated due to safety concerns. Spanish Defense Minister Margarita Robles said that Spain does not support the U.S. decision to send cluster munitions to Ukraine. As a state party to the Convention on Cluster Munitions, Spain has a clear and resounding position on such weapons. The U.S. decision to send weapons to Ukraine is inconsistent with NATO's position. According to the Cambodia China Times, Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen posted on several social media platforms on July 9, calling on the U.S. and Ukraine not to use cluster munitions, while saying that the U.S. decision would constitute a century-long scourge for the Ukrainian people. Hun Sen wrote, "If this is true, if these cluster munitions are used in Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory, it will be the greatest danger for Ukrainians for decades or centuries." He also spoke of the tragic experience in Cambodia, the report describes. The United States dropped cluster munitions on Cambodia in the early 1970s, more than half a century ago, and is still looking for a way to clear these bombs.